The first common language introduced in colonial Brazil was actually not Portuguese.
That's not me. There's another gringo talking about Tupi on the internet. I'm a master's student in Tupi here in Brazil, and I wanted to bring some primary sources to the discussion.
The missionaries noticed that a lot of the languages on the eastern coast of South America seemed to be related despite the fact that they weren't really mutually intelligible.
The title of Anchieta 1595, the first grammar ever written in this language, is called The Art of the Grammar of the Most Used Language on the Coast of Brazil. And within that grammar, he describes how many different nations use the language. Some of them use it this way, some of them use it that way, but it's the same language. 11 years prior, he had described the map basically in a letter called Of the Customs of the Brazilians in 1584, where he says from Maranhão all the way to Pernambuco, down to the Carijós, which is Carioca, the Rio de Janeiro, into Peru. In the deserts, there is one language only. Fernão Cardin in the same year published those Tratados da Terra e do Gente do Brasil, and in there he talks about how when the Portuguese come, they actually learn the language pretty quickly, and their kids that are born there learn it even faster. And that even though there's some different words between the nations, they can understand each other. Then we get another affirmation of that from Sousa in 1587, where he describes that the people in Lisbon and Minho and Douro, which are kind of far away cities in Portugal, have a difference in speech, which is comparable to the difference in speech of these nations, right? And so it's very much so considered a mutually intelligible language. Were there Tupi-Guarani languages which weren't mutually intelligible in Brazil at the time? Yes, but we're not talking about those people when we talk about Língua Geral.
Basically, the missionaries realized that if they wanted to communicate to all these different Tupi peoples, they'd need to figure out some sort of intermediate dialect. And so what they did is essentially create a constructed Koine language called Língua Geral, which is like general language.
It's important to note two things here, that Língua Geral is not a Brazilian concept, it's a Jesuit concept. And it's also not the name of a language, it's a description of the function of the language, right? We see that first in 1551 with El Primer Concilio Limense, where they say, de la orden que se ha de tener endoctrinar los indios, right? How are we going to indoctrinate these indigenous people? And they say, well, there's one common language which a majority of the people speak, so if we do that one, we'll get the most bang for our buck. This gets codified in 1681 with stuff you can read here. You can pause if you want. But that's all to say that the Jesuits in Brazil were following the formula of the Jesuits. They weren't looking at Brazil and saying, damn, we need a conlang. And in terms of this thing about Koine and standardizing, making an intermediary dialect, I would just want to know, like, where is it? Because if you read Anchieta's grammar, you can see that multiple times he says, o uso será o melhor mestre, or that means the use of the language will be your best master. Basically saying, listen, I'm writing as much as I can, but you got to use the language with the people to understand how they use it. And he describes different pronunciations. He says you could say tia, cha, right? Sha, for the same word. He's talking about how in the north they say ake, but in the south they say ake, and that you're going to have to get used to that as a Jesuit, right? And Figueira does similar things, right? Figueira is not simplifying it any more than Anchieta is. And the texts that they produce, all these catechisms, for those of us who read these texts on a daily basis, they're messy. The same writer will use different phonology, different variations, different uses of the same word. It's very not standardized. So when people have made this claim before, I just am so curious as to where it originates from. And that's why it's so important to put primary sources, because if there was some standardized, simplified language by the Jesuits, where is it? Because the language that we study is very messy. It follows the standards of other Tupi-Guarani languages, which we see in modern times. There's a lot of variation, irregular verbs. Why didn't they normalize the irregular verbs? None of it really makes too much sense when you actually look at the sources and you think about what's happening. I just remembered that this Koinization theory, maybe he read it from my actual advisor, Thomas Finbo. You can see his work here. It's really interesting on all this stuff. The Koinization is something that happens naturally over time as you introduce non-Tupi speaking people into these settlements as slaves, and they're forced to learn this. And then disease takes out a lot of people, and you introduce more and disease takes it out. So the theory is that Nhengatu arises from a Koinization, not that Tupinambá or the Jesuit norm, which is defined by Anchieta or Figueira or what we see in the catechisms, These are not Koine, it's not Conlang, it's just a descriptivist codified Jesuit norm of what they happen to use, but they're not making things up other than neologisms for Christian concepts. I just want to say that this video is already more than twice as long as the original video, and the original video has a lot more stuff we need to go over. So if you enjoyed this, we'll do a part 2. Ciao, valeu, falou.